There we go, that's done. Yeah, so this webinar is part of the Escalate programme. So it's support for social enterprises, purposeful businesses and trading charities here in Oxfordshire. So as Gareth said, Town Square and Bicester are one of our enterprise hubs across the county. So we've got 5 hubs. Most of them are in Oxford, and then the Town Square hub in Bicester as well, and then Sophia in corporate as being part of the programme too. I'm just going to mute. Okay. So yeah, so we've got some really great events. Oh, there we go. Those are our hubs across the county. We've got some really great events coming up over the next few months. The Escape programme actually finishes in April this year, sadly, sad times. But we've got a really great programme over the next few months, and I will send a follow-up email after this session with some of the links that have come up in the webinar, and also a list of our upcoming events as well. So you'll get those, and then you can just click through to Eventbrite and register for any that sound interesting for you. Brilliant. Over to you, Gareth.
Cool. Thank you, Rosie. So yeah, it's been a really great thing to be involved in, and if this is the first time you've engaged with Escalate, I highly recommend making the most for the next couple of months, because it's a really incredible resource and an exceptional network of folks now, right? Like there's a really inspirational network formed. So tap into that, make the most of that, and not to mention Rosie and Ashley and Grant and the wider team are just exceptional. So yeah, make the most of that. So today's workshop really is around a few lessons and tricks around how you manage money in your business, how you think about things like pricing of your product, and all of those kind of factors. I've kind of worked on this over, I guess, a period of 10 years of honing it and altering it and changing it for each one. So hopefully there's some really useful things in here. There are some tasks that I'd like us to do as a group. If everyone's keen to kind of play along, it's always a bit different in Zoom compared to when we're doing it in person, but I think it's quite useful to use this time while we're all together to try to do some of this stuff now. And by going through that process, you find other questions and queries about that. So hopefully that's useful. Broadly, I'm going to be sharing some kind of rules of thumb. So I recognize that not all of these things will apply specifically for what you do, but hopefully there'll be a lesson in each of them that you can kind of implement and bear in mind when you're going through that process. So the first starting point really, and this is the kind of main thrust of the first section, is how do you price your business? So again, in the chat, it's kind of 2 questions I'd like to ask. So the first thing is, would you describe yourself as a product-based, as in you sell a thing, or a service-based business, as in you sell your time or your expertise? So if you can just either put product or service in the chat, that would be great. And then the secondary question I have is, how comfortable or how satisfied do you feel like you are with your pricing at the minute? Is it complete? Is it still work in progress? Is it something you haven't even thought of yet? Is it something which you've been doing for 5 years and you're kind of tweaking because of the kind of cost of living impacts, etc.? So yeah, it'd be great to get an idea. It's a really nice mix of product and service businesses. That's good. Rupert's pretty much hit it on the head there. Work in progress. It's constantly work in progress. Starting from scratch, work in progress. Yeah. So I think even though, and hopefully that gives a bit of confidence to those who are at quite an early stage, is that you even if you're a couple of years in, you're still always working on this. It's not a fixed state. So there's definitely no kind of conclusion or destination on this. So lots of mind blocks. Bella, welcome to entrepreneurship. I think entrepreneurship is mind blocks at every kind of avenue, and how you deal with that. This is entrepreneurship in a nutshell, I think. So hopefully that doesn't feel too uncomfortable. So the first rule of 3 I'm going to share, this is really more around those service businesses, freelancers, self-employed professionals, or anyone selling their time. So whether it's agency or whatever your approach is. And this is really trying to think about that question of, what are your customers paying for? So typically when you're starting out, you're thinking about it as being your time, right? This makes a lot of sense. So the time it takes for you to do the work. This is the way it feels like it's a fair way to price what you do. It's transparent. It's quite a reasonable way to go in. And in the early days, when you're after a couple of wins, you think that's the one that's going to get the least kickback, right? But it's really important to factor into that the time it takes you to continue to develop to develop the skills up till now. So all the work you've done, whether it's university, whether it's college, whether it's night school, whatever those things are that have got you to this stage. So it's not just the time in that moment, but all of the investment you've made to date, and then all of the continued investment it takes to continue to develop. So all the time you're listening to podcasts, when you're doing the washing up, when you're watching a TED talk, when you're brushing your teeth, all of those things are your professional development, whether you're in forums, whether you're doing pieces of work on Fiverr, whatever those things are. It's really important to factor that in, because the time that you take to do the work, that is the culmination of a lot of other costs. So just bear that in mind, and we'll talk more about that as we get through when it comes to your marketing time, your admin time, and all of those other factors that you have to cover with the cost. But yeah, don't just think about it, and I'll give some more tools on that in a bit, but don't just think about it as the time it takes to do the work. That doesn't tell the whole story. And it's got a key lesson in this, and without being too kind of direct, I suppose, that there's a truism in that if you devalue yourself, you're devaluing your industry. So by going in at a cheaper rate because you just really want the work, and that you've got that kind of confidence concern or whatever it is, that's what leads to a downward spiral in pricing. I remember really vividly, one of our members in one of our spaces once came to us and said, "Oh, I can do your PR for you. How much are you paying at the minute?" And so I shared, this is what it costs for us to get it done. And he was like, "Oh, I can do it for a tenth of that price." And there was like a sense of, hang on a minute, that I want to know I'm getting good quality. I have no doubt that you can do the job, but there's a sense there that if you're getting something you value, you can pay for it. You ought to value it. So it's not just the time you put into it, but all of the other value that comes out of what work you do. So yeah, if you are a PR, then the value of that coverage or the value of that end result. So it's thinking about that as opposed to just thinking I can do it for £10 an hour cheaper than the competitor. That just becomes a downward spiral, which becomes really difficult for you to manage. By the way, I should say, if you have any questions at any stage, do jump into the chat with them. I want this to be quite an interactive thing. It might come as a shock by the end of the workshop, but I don't necessarily like the sound of my own voice. So yeah, being able to hear what everyone else thinks is quite valuable to me. The second rule of three, this is more around product businesses. And this is really about trying to at least come up with a framework for how you can price your product. So typically what I'm talking about here is there are three elements of cost to your product. There's the overheads. That's all of the things like the office costs, the transport, the servers, your general services, maybe it's utilities, things like that, your marketing. Then you've got your direct costs, so that is the salaries for everyone involved in the team, the cost to manufacture the product, to buy the stock, and then there's the profit, and that is your future. And this is a really kind of key point that I'm going to hammer home quite a lot. So to put this into a framework, if you had a t-shirt business, for example, you're selling it for £30, which is £10 overheads to ship it to your customer, to market for new customers. You've got your £10 direct cost for printing, material, shipping, and then you've got the £10, which is your profit. That's enabling you to buy more stock. It's growing your team. It's launching those new campaigns. I really want to emphasize this point that profit isn't greed. Profit is not the bit that you can think, oh, I'll just shave a bit off that here or there, especially if you're a purpose-driven business. As a purpose-driven business, your profit is your ability to make impact. And so if that's the bit where you're thinking, oh, I can shave a bit off there, you can't shave a bit off the printing cost. You can't go to the printers and say, oh, that's the least important part of it. That's a fixed cost. Your profit has to be a fixed cost. You have to treat it as being a non-negotiable, because it's your future. It's just future security. It's not a dirty word. This is, as a social business especially, this is where you deliver your impact. Alison's point there of getting products to you from Ghana is huge. That's a really important part. That is you can't alter that cost. You might be able to shave a bit here or there every now and again, but it is a cost that you have to face. You have to treat your profit in the same way, because otherwise you don't have control over your future, and now more so than ever. So yeah, in the early days it can feel like, oh, I like them. I want to do them a favor. I'll just shave a bit off here. That's a habit to kind of try to get out of as early as you can in the process. It's not easy. I'm with all of this advice, I'm saying like as if it's something you can just do like that. It's not easy. This is hard stuff, but it's really important to get those principles in place from the start. The third rule of three, this kind of applies both ways. for your freelancers and service businesses. So hopefully this covers on both sides. And this is really about trying to work out what your life costs. What do you need to charge in order to be able to sustain yourself based on the business? So this is going to be quite an interactive exercise. This is one I want to treat as a bit of a task. So essentially the rule of thumb on this is aim to make what you need to make in 3 days. So the first step of this is working out how much you need to make every month just to live. So that is thinking about your rent, your mortgage, your car insurance, your fuel costs, your food, buying clothes for your kids, going out for dinner every now and again, all of those things, your Netflix subscription, your phone, any credit card repayments, any loan repayments, working this all out on a list in front of you. And when I'm saying this like as a hypothetical, I mean now. We're going to do this as a task. So make sure you've got paper in front of you, and we'll do this. You're not going to have to share that with anyone, so be honest to yourself as much as possible. The next step from there is we're going to add 30% to that, which is just about having a realistic idea of what a fun life is, right? Like this isn't about scraping by and just paying your kind of bills. This is about the life you're trying to design. And then from there, what we do is we divide it up to work out what your day rate needs to be. So I'm going to set that as the first task. What I might do is give that about 3 minutes or so. I'll leave my camera on and I'll sip my tea, and I've still got the chat box on if anyone's got any questions. But yeah, I'll give that 3 minutes from here, just for you to write down anything you can think of that you're paying out every month that you need to draw a salary from or draw takings from the business in order to cover. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm going to put some suggestions into the chat box about things to think about that you might not have thought about. But again, be completely honest here. Like if you're getting a nice lunch at Pret every 2 or 3 days a week, include that in. That's the realities of living.
So how much were you saying divide this number up? Divide it by how much? How many?
We'll do that in the next phase. So for now, it's just writing that list. Yeah. I think so, Claire. I'll come back to that question if that's okay. That's a really good question. So yeah, we'll get into that in a bit more detail in a second if that's okay. We'll give that about another 30 seconds or so. Okay, cool. So hopefully everyone's got their list, and everyone's got a good idea of how much you need to make every month to live. Again, some of those might be monthly costs, might be weekly costs, might be quarterly or annual costs. So the next step then, yeah, we are going to basically work it out by dividing it by the number of weeks and the number of days. So if you've got a number in your head of, for the benefit of just having a round number, £30,000 per year you need to make, what we're going to do is divide that number by 45 weeks. So £30,000 divided by 45 weeks is £666 a week, and then divide that weekly total by 3, which gives us £222 a day. So the reason for doing this, my rationale here, you need to allow time for holidays. So there's a bit of a kind of, I don't know, an idea that as an entrepreneur, you never get time to take breaks, or you never get time to take any time off to rest. You have to factor that in. As someone creating a new work style, in those early years, it's important to establish the habits that become the way you go from the future. So if you're not expecting to make a living, you have to work all 52 weeks a year, you're buying yourself that extra leeway and capacity. So it gives you a more realistic target of what you need to earn a week. And then by dividing it by 3, what you're doing is giving yourself an idea of what you need to make if you make 3 fully sold out days a week of activity. But it also allows you for, if you're working 4 days, you've got a bit of an extra kitty. As anyone who's already got started will probably know, you'll have some weeks where you're working 6 days, some you're working 2 days. You might still be working, but you're doing admin or you're doing marketing, you're doing that unchargeable, unbillable stuff. So what this does is it builds a bit of tolerance in that gives you an idea of what your day rate should be. So what I want to ask you to do is, if you either multiply your monthly running costs or work out over the course of a year, based on what you've written down on your list, what you need to be making, and then divide that by 45, and then divide that by 3, please. I don't want you to tell me the number, but what I want you to put in the chat is whether that's above or below what you're currently charging, or what you expected to charge, or whether that shocks you, or whether that's something which you kind of expected to come out of the truth. If that doesn't make sense, this is normally the kind of part of the workshop where I'm relying on eye contact to know whether that's landed and whether that makes a lot of sense, because there are some people who hate the idea of being given a maths quiz like this halfway through a workshop. So if this isn't 100% clear, just let me know either through chat or jump on the mic. Yeah, so that should give you your day rate that you need to make, Carmel. The net point is another question. We'll talk a bit about taxes shortly, but it just gives you an idea of net of any operating costs from your business. That's what you need to make. So we're dividing by 3. Bella's got good news. That's good. So here's the dividing by 45, that gives us the weekly target. And then we divide by 3 to give us an idea of how much we'd need to make if we were working 3 days a week. So what it does, it builds some tolerance in to do marketing, build some tolerance in to do things like, if you want to do some freebies because there's someone you want to do a favor for, or you've got a feeling it's going to unlock some doors, or it might get you a nice logo on your website, although I would not recommend doing work on that basis. So it just gives you an idea of, if you were working 60% of that week, or if you were working billable hours 60% of that week, that gives you the target. Cool. That's always nice to be told. Anyone else? Is it kind of where you expected? Is it above, below? Or is everyone just bamboozled? I didn't sign up for a maths quiz. We should put it as a disclaimer at the bottom. There's a maths quiz halfway through. Good sentiment, yeah. That's another point, Hayden. It's really about having a guideline, right? You're the entrepreneur. You're the one deciding what you do and how you price, how you structure. But at least if you've got a framework and you've got a guide, it helps you to understand, why am I getting to the end of every month and I feel like I'm always in catch-up mode. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But it just gives you a bit of a framework or a bit of an idea of what you need to make ends meet. That's the other part of doing this now, and just spending 3 or 4 minutes doing it as an exercise. It's not to say you completely conclude it, it gives you a framework that you might do every 3 months or every 6 months. You might build that into how you do your own personal financial management as well. Rupert and Alison, that's really good feedback as well. So yeah, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what the target is. I mentioned it briefly then. There's another factor in this, which is tax. There's a longer workshop or a longer version of this workshop I do, which kind of talks about the permutations of tax, etc. It's a bit too variable to do in the kind of rule of thumb side of things. But if you, yeah, I mean, the best advice, honestly, in this is HMRC have an incredible call center that they will answer any question, no matter how daft you think it is. That they've got a really great team who are well trained to deal with that stuff. So I'd say, yeah, and equally, I know within the Escalate network there are folks who offer advice and support to social and purpose-driven companies as well. So yeah, this is something where if you want specific tax advice, there are routes to get that, but it's so variable. It's a longer workshop. Cool. I want to kind of come back to Claire's point in a bit of a way now, and I really want to build on your question, Claire, because I think it's a really good example. But talking about it more in the framework of again, how you price based on what else is happening in the market. So I don't know if anyone has ever watched the show Arrested Development. Anyone seen that show? I'm watching it back again for about the 500th time at the minute, and it's just so, yeah, I love it. So there's this one scene where George Bluth is doing these kind of retreats in the desert, and he basically gets them all really hot, and he charges them 15 grand for a cup of lemonade. And the idea here is that you've got a bit of an element of supply and demand in what you do. So if you're trying to sell cold drinks on a hot day and you've got a lot of stock, if you're trying to sell cold drinks on a cold day and you've got a lot of stock, and you're trying to sell cold drinks on a hot day and you've got limited stock or there's scarcity, this all has an impact on your pricing, right? So if you've got a lot of stock on a hot day, you've probably got moderate pricing. If you've got a lot of cold stock on a cold day and you don't have high demand, then you're going cheap. And if you've got a hot day, not much stock, then you can kind of price accordingly. So this is really about understanding where you think you sit in the marketplace. There's a huge element here around confidence and around being bold enough. And like I gave that example earlier of the PR, it's having that kind of confidence to say, actually, do you know what? I know what I need to make, and I know what kind of clients I want to work with and who values what I do. But if you know you're in a really busy marketplace and you're having to fit into that cold drinks on a cold day, try and think. And if you know that, and I'm sure if you do, you've been thinking about this, but if that's the case, just try and think about what might set you apart or what might be a differentiator, whether it's really only focusing on a specific market or a segment in that market, and trying to factor in what might move me more towards that cold drink on a hot day. So yeah, that again, like I said, that could be just saying we only provide our service. We only provide PR for this. Claire, I am so grateful you said you're in the middle of a prep, because as that being the example that I gave earlier, that feels like a good callback. So yeah, so try and think about what can you do to control which of those brackets you fit into. So if you feel like you're really in that kind of middle bracket, how do you move more towards one or the other? Okay, hoping that all makes sense. Moving on to the business model. So your business model essentially is how you make your business work. So typically, going back kind of 10 years or so, or even now it's kind of common parlance, we talk about the business plan. I think the business plan, just checking there are no bank managers on the call, but I think broadly speaking, a business plan is a waste of time. Like there are elements of a business plan which are useful, but it's much more interesting or valuable to understand what your business model is and to think about all these different elements, all the value of what you do and these things. The reason why I think a business plan is a waste of time is because you can't predict anything in life and even less so in business. And I think if any of us who've been alive for the last decade or in business for the last 15, 20 years, there is so much volatility around every corner that trying to factor all that into a business plan doesn't really work. Why I love a business model is that it helps to communicate and explain the value you create, who the stakeholders are that you rely on, and all of those other factors. So there's a really great tool which you may already be aware of called the Business Model Canvas. There are a lot of really good canvases now that are available for helping you to think through different things in different ways. But the kind of evolution of this is the social business model canvas. And if I just pull it up on screen so you can see it, I'm not going to go into great detail, but you can download these PDFs and frameworks and print them off, or you can do them online, or however you choose to do it. But essentially what this helps you to understand is what is your kind of relationship with your customers? How do people see you, treat you? What's the loyalty like? How do they think of you? What are the benefits? And then what you do, or the way I recommend doing it, essentially you kind of create these, you fill in 5 or 10 things into each of these boxes. So what are my revenue streams? How do I reinvest back into the community? Who are my key allies and partners? Some of these, I'm mindful that some of these headings are quite jargony at first sight, but there are some really amazing resources online to help you to kind of go through these processes. My guidance is you do about 5 or 10 in each of these brackets, and then you aim to double each of those. And then essentially what you do is you say, right, okay, so Escalate are a key ally. The social innovation we're creating together is upskilling and supporting freelancers. What if instead of it being an ad hoc relationship, we had a formal MOU to deliver this? So it helps you to kind of experiment with different parts of your business model. And the best examples I'd give here would be, the likes of Google. The value you get from doing a Google search. Actually shared a link in there for a webinar, so that's really useful. So the example, if you're doing a Google search, you don't pay for that, but someone else pays for it because they get the value of getting in front of you. So the business model is not you use the service and you pay. The business model is you use the service and someone else pays. For some businesses, it's straightforward. If you're a graphic designer, it might be as straightforward as saying, yeah, you pay me for a 3-hour piece of work and I do it for you, but there might be a retainer you build into that. There might be some other kind of licensing you build into that, or some other kind of value creation. So it's really trying to think about how you can innovate on what your business model is to provide more value for you and potentially more value for your clients in the future as well. And even for businesses where it feels like you might have quite a traditional business model, you might be surprised at where you can find innovation by doing this exercise on a fairly regular basis. So yeah, I'd really recommend looking into that in more detail and following up with Ashley's link there. The next point is really about funding for your business, and kind of just again in the chat, can I get a kind of quick straw poll? Who thinks fundraising is something they're going to have to do? Is this something that people are anxious about? Is it something they're optimistic about? Is it something they're not having to think about? I can see a couple of shakes of heads and things, but it'd be good to get an idea. Now, the way I always think about money when it comes to launching your business or as a barrier is that it really often feels like a completely, Jackie, I am on your side. I hate fundraising too. Claire, right, okay, you're going to be a very popular person. So fundraising can feel like a real solid, impenetrable wall. It can feel like a massive distraction because it can become a full-time job. So Jake's point, looking at setting things up for investment currently, that can become a full-time job. It can become all-encompassing. When you're dancing with different investors, you're kissing all the frogs, they all ask you for a different bit of evidence or a different bit of something, and it just becomes a full-time distraction. And it can help, it can really drive this feeling of powerlessness when you're anything but. So a big part of this, and that's part of the initial task as well, is thinking about your relationship with money, understanding when it really is truly a barrier and when there could be more creative ways to overcome the task. So I'm going to kind of do this as a bit of a, there'll be a task that kind of follows this in a second. But when we're thinking about fundraising, we're typically talking for early stage companies at 3 areas that you would fundraise from. So the first one is friends. So that might be, people who are kind of chipping in to give you the freedom to be able to quit your job, to spend more time on this. Family, so it might be you've got a great aunt who has you kind of written into their will and inheritance, and they want to see you having that value before they pass away. And then the final category is fools. And the reason why this is quite important is that anyone investing in an early stage company is taking a massive risk, right? There's no guarantee it's going to work. Most of these people are doing it because they either frankly love you, or they believe in you, or they want you to succeed. And that tends to be where those kind of initial elements of investment come from. as you're getting started, or certainly when you go through that process and building enough confidence or evidence in what you're doing to be able to go for more formal funding routes. So the two, again, this is really rule of thumb stuff, but the two brackets and categories that I tend to break down any kind of fundraising costs into are your revenue costs and your capital costs. So to illustrate that, what I want to do, again, we'll probably spend about 3 minutes or so, is I want you to write down a list in front of you. Depending on how your brain works, there are different ways of doing this. So I'll give a couple of different kind of suggestions, and you can kind of choose which route you go. The first one would be essentially just writing down all the things that you think you need to fundraise for to either make progress, to launch, to scale, to take over the world, whatever your kind of goal is. The other way you can think about this is write down £10,000 on the top of one column, £100,000 at the top of the second column, and then £10 million at the top of the third column. And essentially just write down, if you had that money, what would you spend it on in order to scale your social business and your mission? So that can help to kind of remove some of those barriers sometimes. I've got to be clear, if you put in the 10 million bracket, you're getting a yacht or a private island, that doesn't count. It has to be eligible business costs. And I also need to make sure I'm clear that we don't have a blank checkbook that we're offering at the end of it for anyone's best suggestions. So yeah, we'll give that another kind of 2.5 minutes or so, just to write down a list of anything that you see yourself needing to fundraise for in order to kind of launch your business or grow or scale. I absolutely can. Good to see you, Leah. So cool. So is anyone happy to start sharing anything that's on their list?
Do you want us to share any of the lists, or the first one, or which?
Yeah, anything. I'm kind of curious to see what the strangest thing on your list is, what the biggest thing, what the smallest thing, what the thing is that's worrying you most. Anything like that. Yeah, please.
Gareth, can you hear me?
Yeah, just about. Yeah, can you hear us okay?
It's Claire. Have I got a lot of reverberation in the middle of Brighton, Summertown?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of background noise, but that's okay.
Can I just say that's been actually really helpful for me as regards growth areas as to where our charity could go into. I mean, do you want me to list some of those ideas, or is it just a case of...
Please. Yeah, please, it would be great to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear those.
So, I mean, basically, we're a grief support charity in Oxfordshire, and we currently support families with children up to the age of 18. And that's what we are limited to do right now within the revenue, the fundraising that we can support them with. However, there's so much growth potential as regards whether we can then encourage social community hubs to get our network of families working closer together, that we could do with funding to explore into. We could do with extending the age potentially as well, because we're finding a lot of our younger, I mean, I don't want to be morbid, but a lot of our deaths now are early suicides with 22 to 25, and we can't support those at the moment. So we have dozens of different avenues where we could grow, which would require additional salaries for additional practitioners, and so forth. So yeah, we could do a lot more than what we're doing now if we had that plan and that revenue stream and to put forward. That was my 2 pennies worth.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's perfect. That gives me a good framework, and with the feedback we've had in as well. So, so if I move on to the next slide. So Bella's shared that a lot of it is people costs. So it's marketing support, someone to develop, run subscription service. There's interesting differences there. You've got the niche skills, and then you've got the general getting work done. So adding capacity. Excuse me. Similar with Jake. So the delivery team, valuable thing about training them as well, and providing that kind of management support and that feedback. There's also said about the kit and new teachers, so expanding the capacity. I think that's similar to Claire's point there about increasing capacity, but also trying to reach into new markets, which is really useful. Marketing, photography, video in Ghana. That's about outsourcing as well, which is really useful. Advertising and rent. Increasing staff wages, salaries, doing things like website development. This is really useful stuff. So the reason why I find this a valuable exercise to do, and again, it's something which you can do on a regular basis, it helps to just demystify. So instead of this idea that I need to raise £500,000 to get this job done, instead of doing that, you break it down into, okay, actually I need to raise £50,000 to do that part. And if I do that part, then I can do this part. Well, maybe it's not 50,000, because if I work with that partner, they've got capacity to do this. So actually, maybe it's only this. So it's trying to break it up from this big wall of I need to raise all the money in the world to be able to make progress, to starting to think about how we chunk it. And the two distinctions within this, and that's what's been great about the feedback so far, is that you've got revenue costs. So they are things like salaries, rent, utilities, your running costs, your insurance, your marketing. The revenue costs are those things that once you've spent the money, you've got nothing to show for it, broadly speaking. It's something which is maybe a controllable cost of running your business, but it's, and then without kind of giving away the spoiler, it's something that if I took a loan out for £50,000 and I spent it all on salaries, rent, utilities, and then I couldn't pay back the loan, there's nothing the bank could come back and take back off me, because it's all been spent on the overheads. Whereas if I spent it on capital, and this would be examples of things like your equipment, vehicles, premises, maybe web development, app development, software development, if it's appropriate, and then things like legal fees and maintenance, there's some longer term value. So for example, if I spent that £50,000 on some cameras, a van, something like this, some furniture for an office or for a shop, then that's stuff that if the bank came back in 12 months, they'd have something to show for it. Why I'm saying that, and hopefully that doesn't sound too negative in that sense, is that it's often a lot easier to raise money for capital expenditure than it is for revenue expenditure. And I think similar to the point made by Alison is that there's some things that kind of cross over between those. So if you shot a video in Ghana, that becomes an asset for your business. You could trade on that video for 2 or 3 years. It is an asset, but it's not necessarily something the bank would say, oh, we could sell that to someone else. There's value in it. Similar with a website or with an app or something like that. So it's trying to think about anything you're spending money on, what's the long-term value for you as a business, and what's the long-term value for potential external stakeholders if you needed to realize value from that asset quite quickly. Does that make sense? Yeah, broadly speaking. So it just helps to frame costs in a different way, and it helps to frame how you talk with potential funders as well. And when we're talking about potential funders, the easiest way, again, to kind of break this down is you're talking about 4 categories. You're talking about equity investments, sales, awards, and debt. So when I'm talking about equity investments, the unfortunate kind of example here is like Dragon's Den, where you say to someone, my business is one day going to be worth £10 million. Now it's worth, a hat. But if you invest £100,000 at this value and it grows at that scale, then your £100,000 will be worth X in the future. So the idea of equity is that you sell a percentage of your company with the hope and objective that that investment enables you to scale up and grow. Equity investments are good in that it can make sure it can mean someone's very aligned with your goal. Someone is, they literally have a stake in what you're building. It's something which is, that is the commitment you're making. You're not committing to debt repayments, anything like that. The downside is you can only sell the equity once. If you sell it to the wrong person, it can create some kind of real headaches and issues. And equally, it doesn't work for every business model. If you're a freelancer, you can't really sell equity. If you are a charity, it's a lot harder to sell equity. There are different ways of doing it. So equity works for some businesses more than others. Debt's a strange one, because debt often, you imagine people would not want to run up debt or get into debt. I actually think debt is probably one of the best ways to fundraise for your business, mainly because you know where you stand, you know what your repayments are, you know what the terms are, and they don't change. So that's quite static. So you've got visibility. The interest you're paying is basically to get the money now as opposed to in 5 years' time or something like that. But that said, it's a lot trickier to get debt as an entrepreneur or as an early stage company. There are different ways you can look at debt. So there could be a leasing scheme or something like this. But if you kind of ignore the way we think of debt as a personal financing tool for a business, it's often quite a sensible way to go. Awards, this is things like grants, this is competitions, this is maybe going to a hackathon or an innovation challenge, something like that. There are quite a wide range of financial awards available. So I don't know if you're aware of organizations like Unlimited, UNLTD. I'll write that in the chat just because that's a bit of a less obvious one. But they do really great grants for purpose-driven entrepreneurs. And that is normally, no strings. It's really about developing that individual. It's a great organization. There's things like Innovate UK, which do grants for innovation around a range of challenges and calls. So grants, they do exist. They're just, normally a bit trickier to kind of get access to, and they normally don't come for nothing. I think there's this idea that a grant is for nothing, but a grant tends to come with a lot of paperwork, a lot of risk with the application process, a lot of reporting, and all of those things. To my mind, the best way to fundraise for any business is sales, because what sales does is it makes it easier to access all of those other things. If you've got evidence of sales, then you are showing there's demand, you're showing there's the potential to scale, you're giving confidence to all of those other funders, but equally you're buying your own freedom because you're bringing clean revenue in. So it might sound, in the context of fundraising, it might sound counterintuitive, but it is, to my mind, the best way to get money in, is finding a way to sell. There's a bigger picture in that as well, but yeah, in the interest of time, I'll kind of stick to that. So does that all make sense? Again, any questions, please do put them in the chat. Because like I say, I'm mindful a lot of these theories are quite rule of thumb, so they're quite high level. So moving on to some kind of formalities in how you manage your money and your finances in the business. So hopefully most of you will have written an invoice by now, but there's some things, thanks Alison, I appreciate that. I think there's some things that still are quite useful to say. So essentially, when you're writing an invoice, there's a bunch of useful data to have on there. So you'd have your company name, your address, your customer name, so they know it's directed at them. You'd have the date when it was issued. You'd have the due date of when you expect to be paid by. You'd have potentially the purchase order, so you can direct it to the right people. You'd have a breakdown of what the fee is for. Can anyone spot the obvious thing missing from this invoice that would be quite useful? Spot on.
It doesn't tell them how to pay it.
Yeah, that's it. Perfect. So yeah, making sure that even those simple things are quite clear. If you use Go Cardless, if you're setting up a direct debit, if you expect them to pay by bank transfer, making it as clear and obvious as possible. That might be how you establish the terms at the start, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, it's not always so straightforward as pay into this bank account. There are other ways that you can do that. So yeah, so if you haven't, email address, contact details is a good shout, Alison, as well. And who the key contact is, who the key person is, that can always be useful as well. If you hopefully you've already started this process. If you haven't, there are some really useful invoice templates just by doing a Google search online. So just have a scan through and check those out. I want to say a short bit on credit control, mainly because this is something which is always a bit of a trap when you first get started out in business, where you start getting invoices out there and you started to secure work and you're thinking, this is great, everything's going well, but your bank account doesn't necessarily reflect that. So the first thing is, cash is neither king or queen. Cash is the crucial thing. Cash is the royalty. Cash is the difference maker in all of this. So even if you're flat out, you're incredibly busy, it's all looking rosy, the cash that's in your bank account at the end of the day is the thing that tells you the truth. There are things you can do that it's more than reasonable to do as well. So asking for 50% in advance or upfront before you deliver the work, for example, that's not an unreasonable thing to do. You can create tranches or milestones or things like that. Again, if people value what you're doing, then that kind of indicates that. It can also tell you a story about whether they're likely to be a difficult payer down the line. And also, as I kind of illustrated in that invoice example, offering shorter terms. So putting the deadline in there is useful because it gives people an idea of when you're going to start chasing up on that, and you must chase up on that. As awkward as that might feel, or as uncomfortable or out of your nature it might feel sometimes, you have to chase up when people are late payers. Excuse me. Offering short terms is a really important way to drive that urgency. You might have some clients you're working with who say our minimum terms are 30 days, 45 days, whatever they think that they can get away with. Always push back. Don't be afraid to push back on that. Especially the example I always give here is if you're working with universities or larger organizations that, there's an expectation you fall in line with what their terms are. There's a lot more protection now for freelancers and small businesses than has ever been before. And there's a lot more, I think, of a moral obligation for companies to pay in line with those terms. So offer short terms because it means you can start chasing sooner. There are all sorts of examples I've seen of people who've said, pay before this date and get a 10% discount. There are things like factoring that you can use that help you to get that money quicker. But yeah, always have that in mind around offering shorter terms. And then the kind of final real point to share on this is bank accounts. So one thing I'd say is, as an essential, and this might sound like a small thing or an operational thing, but I'd always recommend setting up a business bank account. It makes your life a lot easier if you register that earlier in the process. You don't have to go with who your personal bank is, but it might help with the pacing and things like that. But really what I'd recommend in this day and age is start out with someone like an online challenger bank like Starling or Tide or someone like that, because typically you can get a bank account set up there and then. It keeps it cleaner. It means it's easier to track your expenses. It means it's easier to understand what money belongs to you and to the business. I'd almost say, and I don't want to make this sound flippant, but you can set up a bank account with someone like Starling as an early stage thing, get a sense of whether it's working, and then shop around and see what's happening in the market. There's been all sorts of things around high street banks not giving business accounts to people or taking 6 weeks and all these things. And if you've got an invoice you need to get out there and then, I'd always say, rather than putting it to your personal account, set up one of the challenges and just do it that way, just to keep things clean and kind of partitioned off. So I wouldn't say there's a preference over which of those to go with. I'm always curious to see in the group what people are doing, because it's always quite a good insight into what's working and what people are satisfied with. Again, if you know you're not going to take any cash, then going with the online providers is great. But if you know you are going to take cash, then the online providers might not be a good shout. So yeah, if anyone's got any kind of feedback on that in the chat, I'd appreciate that around what your current experience is. Monzo, yes, Hayden, that's a really good point I should have made. so many of these new challenger banks have amazing integration with online software platforms. So things like Xero, being able to export to other platform. Sally's saying Starling's working well as well. So that's good. So yeah, so that's a really good part. But that said, banks like NatWest and Nationwide, etc., kind of catching up quite well as well. There's another factor in this, which is around the ethics of the bank. Yeah, it doesn't take too much research online to find out that some banks are not very ethical, and I'm sure that you probably already know most of the repeat offenders as well. So that might be a big factor if you're a social purpose company and you are putting, without saying the example of the bank I'm thinking of, at the bottom of your invoice, it might make people think, huh, okay, well that doesn't add up. So that might be a factor you're thinking about as well, is whether the bank that you choose to bank with is part of your brand and part of your storytelling as well, especially if you're working with specific markets or audiences. I am happy to take any questions. I think we've still got another half an hour, Rosie, on the clock if we need to kind of use it. So I'm happy to kind of go into things in more detail. I wanted to really go into Claire's example in a bit more detail because there were some things to share. But I wanted to give one more plug for the Escalate program for that kind of broader access to the network. And if I can be so cheeky, I also wanted to share, I do a kind of weekly post on something called The Good Founder, which is around lessons I've learned over my years of doing what I do. Hopefully they're quite useful. I've always I've enjoyed doing it, but equally enjoyed hearing different people's thoughts and ideas on some of the complexities and challenges of running a social or purpose-driven company. So I would, I don't know, completely selfishly ask you to sign up and follow and give me feedback on that.
Brilliant.
But I just wanted.
Thanks, Gareth.
Oh, sorry, Rosie. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, absolutely check out Gareth's website, because the 50 things emails that you've been sending out have been really, really inspiring. So definitely check that out. Thank you so much. It's actually only an hour session. So if you've got any questions, it might be best at this point if I just send out the follow-up email after this, and then if you've got any questions, you can just email me, and I can, Gareth, if you're happy for me to share your contact details, I can put that in the follow-up email as well, and get in touch with Gareth. I will share the recording and the slides in the email as well. Perfect. There you go. So you'll have our details for any questions or comments. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Gareth. That's just as always, really, really inspiring and insightful. So thank you. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope to see you at another Escalate event again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you soon.